Hello students, so it is nice to see you again in this video. So we will continue our discussion about the perspective of mental disorders. So we overview briefly about the psychological tradition in the past video, and we will continue the discussion here. So the first one from the psychoanalytic theory. So even though most of the theory remains unproven today, so psychoanalytic theory has had a strong influence, you like it or not, right? And it's still important to be familiar with its some basic ideas, okay? So, so Freud here had discovered the unconscious mind, right? And its apparent influence on the production of psychological disorders here. And this is like one of the most important developments in the history of psychopathology and indeed the psychology as a whole. All right, so we're like briefly refresh our memory about the unconscious mind here. So the structure of the mind and the distinct function of personality sometimes clash with one another. So according to Freud, you know already that the mind has three major parts or function or function: the id, the ego, and the superego. So the id is the source of a strong sexual and aggressive feeling or energies, and it operates according to pleasure principles, while the ego is the part of our mind that ensures that we act realistically, right? And it operates according to the reality principles instead of pleasure principle. And the third important structure is the superego, that is the moral principles that instilled in us by our parents or our culture. This is like the voice inside us that nags us when we know we're doing something wrong. So because the purpose of the superego is to counteract the potentially dangerous, aggressive, and sexually drives of the id, so so the basis for conflict is there, okay? So the role of ego is then to mediate the conflicts between superego and the id, okay, and juggling their demons with the realities of the world. But often it failed. If it's unsuccessful, and then the id or the superego becomes too strong, so the conflict will overtake us, and psychological disorder will develop. And the next concept of psychoanalysis is the defense mechanism, with which the mind defends itself from these clashes or conflict, right? So even though Freud first conceptualized defense mechanism, but it was Anna Freud who actually developed the ideas more fully. So we all use defense mechanism at times, and sometimes they're adaptive, but sometimes maladaptive. So people who use defense mechanism as maladaptive will develop a psychological disorders. All right. And then the next one is the stage of early psychosocial development according to Freud, okay? And it provides grease for the mill of our inner conflict. As you can see here, like the development of the psychosexual conflicts will one of the example that occurs during the phallic stage, for example, that's from the age of 3 to age 5 or 6, which is characterized by the early genital self-stimulation. And the conflict is the subject of the Greek tragedy Oedipus Rex, right? So that's one of the example. Because of the so the Oedipus is fated to kill his father and unknowingly marry his mother, right? So Freud asserted that all young boys relieve the fantasy when the genital self-stimulation is accompanied by images or sexual interaction with their mothers. Okay. And these fantasy in turn are accompanied by strong feelings of envy and perhaps anger towards their father, whom they identify, right? But whose place they wish to take also. Okay, so even though controversial, then many techniques of psychoanalytic psychotherapy or psychoanalysis are designed to reveal the nature of unconscious mental processes and conflicts through catharsis and insight. And also Freud developed techniques of free association in which patients are instructed to say whatever comes to mind without the usual socially required censoring, right? So free association is intended to reveal emotionally charged materials that may be repressed or because it is too painful or threatening to bring into consciousness. All right, so as you can see in a lot of images, Freud's patient lay on couch and then he sat behind them so that they would not be distracted. And this is how the couch became the symbol of psychotherapy in popular media out there. Also, there's an dream analysis in psychoanalytic therapy as well. All right, so as psychoanalysis swept into the world at the beginning of the 20th century, the behavioral model, which is also known as the cognitive behavioral model, or the social learning model, brought the systematic development or a more scientific approach to psychological aspect or psychopathology here. And so human behavior determined by life experiences, right? And the approach of behavioral paradigm is from observable behavior and environmental factors. And the most essential model psychopathology of behavioral paradigm are the operation conditioning, modeling, and classical conditioning that may cause abnormalities. And further, the behavioral paradigm, so the therapist here is more to be a teacher rather than a healer. So let's take a look closer briefly here in his classic study examining why dogs salivate before the presentation of food. Ivan Pavlov, the physiologist, he initiated the study of classical conditioning here. This is a type of learning in which a neutral stimulus is paired with a response until it elicits that response, right? So conditioning is one way in which we acquire new information, particularly information that is somewhat emotional in nature. So for example, why someone could experience anxiety after car accident. So here's the explanation. Before conditioning, there are no fear or anxiety to a car at all, right? And during condition, when the car or as the conditioned stimulus paired with traumatic car accident as the unconditioned stimulus, it happened, resulting unconditional response, or which is the fear or the anxiety. And after conditioning, every time the car as the unconditioned stimulus occurred, so even though it's not paired with accident anymore, fear is still appeared as a conditioned response. And from the behavioral paradigm, one important name is Watson, as the founder of behaviorism actually. He suggests that psychology no more needs introspection or non-quantifiable methods that than do chemistry or physics. So here, Watson wants to lay psychology from behaviorism, from observation and more scientific method. He did an experiment with a boy named Albert. I believe that you still remember the experiments. Albert was not afraid of the small animal and enjoyed playing with it. But every time Albert reached the rat, and then the experimenter made a loud noise behind him. And based on these experiments, after only 5 trials, Albert showed the first signs of fear if the white rat came near. And the next behaviorism principle is the principle of operant conditioning. Yeah, you still remember this as well, I hope. It's a type of learning in which behavior changes as a function of what follows the behavior. So Skinner here observed early on that a large part of our behavior is not automatically elicited by an unconditioned stimulus, and that we must account for this, okay? So Skinner coined the term operant conditioning because behavior operates on the environment and changes it in so many ways. So most things that we do socially provide the context for other people to respond to us in one way or another, thereby providing consequences for our behavior. So he pointed out that all of our behavior is governed to some degree of reinforcement. All right, so for example, here after traumatic accident, we tend to avoid car because when we're avoiding car, our fear or anxiety is reduced. All right, so according to Skinner as well, using punishment is no better than reinforcement, because punishment as a consequences is relatively ineffective in the long run, and that the primary way to develop a new behavior is to positively reinforce desired behavior. Okay, so Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner contributed significantly to behavior therapy, in which scientific principles of psychology are applied to clinical problems. So, for example, here, extinction, systematic desensitization, systematic desensitization and reinforcement for a behavioral therapy, right? So, extinction here is the learning process in which a response maintained by reinforcement in operant conditioning or pairing in classical conditioning will decreases when that reinforcement or pairing is removed. So also the procedure of removing that reinforcement or pairing. And the systematic desensitization is the individuals were gradually introduced to the object or situation that they feared, so that their fear could extinct. Okay, so they could test reality and see that nothing bad happened in the presence of the phobic object or scenes. And finally, the reinforcement. So in operant conditioning, consequences for behavior that strengthen it or increase its frequency. So positive reinforcement involves the contingent delivery of a desired consequences. So negative reinforcement is the contingent escape from an aversive consequences. All right, continue from the behavioral paradigm. The next one is the humanistic paradigm. So here's the theories here, for example, Adler paradigms on humanistic emphasize the positive or the optimistic side of the human nature, and he believed that human nature reach its fullest potential when we contribute to other individuals and to society as a whole. So self-actualization, it was the watchword for the humanistic paradigm, okay? And also humanistic paradigm is also focused on individual uniqueness. Also the one theorist that is popular is Abraham Maslow for his systematic in describing the structure of personality based on his hierarchical needs in seeing human needs, right? All right. So according to humanistic paradigm, a variety of conditions may block our self-actualization and may cause psychopathology. And the cause of psychopathology, it could be several things that you can read from these slides. So for example, like the self-denial, the loss of meaning of life, and again, unable to actualize himself or herself. And the techniques that develop from humanistic theory is some of the major techniques that have been used are self-actualization, the person-centered therapy, and the unconditional positive regard. So to refresh your mind, that self-actualization or self-actualizing is the process to emphasize in humanistic psychology in which people strive to achieve their highest potential against the difficult life of experience. And the person-centered therapy is the method in which the client, rather than the counselor or the psychologist, primarily directs the course of the discussion. seeking the self-discovery and self-responsibility there. And the unconditional positive regard is the acceptance by the counselor or the therapist of the client's feeling and action without judgment or condemnation. Okay, so we've just reviewed 3 traditions of ways of thinking about the causes of psychopathology: the supernatural, the biological, and the psychological. We've moved forward to scientific methods perspective here. So in the 1990s, 2 developments came together as never before to shed light of the nature of psychopathology. So the first one is the increasing sophistication of scientific tools and methodology. And the second one is the realization that no one influence, either it's biological, behavioral, cognitive, emotional, or social, ever occurs in isolation. So literally every time we think, we feel, or do something, the brain and the rest of the body are hard at work together. So in other words, our behavior, both normal and abnormal, is the product of a continual interaction of psychological, biological, and social influences. And move forward to the by 2000, a veritable explosion of knowledge about psychopathology had occurred, and the young fields of cognitive science and neuroscience began to grow exponentially as we learn more about the brain and how we process, how we remember, and how we use information. And at the same time, startling new findings from behavioral science reveal that importance of early experience in determining later development. So it was clear that a new model was needed that would consider biological, again, psychological, and social influences on behavior. So this approach to psychopathology would combine findings from all areas with our rapidly growing understanding of how we experience life, right, during different development periods from infancy to the old age. All right, so continue moving forward. In the present, we should explore the reciprocal influences among neuroscience, cognitive science, behavioral science, and developmental science, and demonstrate that the only currently valid model of psychopathology is the multidimensional and integrative approach. All right, so thank you for your attention in this video. So we will continue to the next video to the discussion about the integrative approach to psychopathology, and we will see how or this point of view we should see it in a very comprehensive way to see psychopathology. All right, thank you, and I'll see you soon.